Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News, an Indian perspective on All India Radio. This is Renu Kataria and with me is R.S. Raghu bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister talks to top Vietnamese leader Nguyen Phu Trong, holds discussion on situation in Ukraine and South China Sea. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses the global impact of Ukraine conflict, especially on food and energy security, with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. India to inaugurate 3-day Global Ayush Investment and Innovation Summit. India to export wheat to Egypt this year. Death toll in Philippines from tropical storm Maggie climbs to 130. Christians across the world observing Good Friday today. Prime Minister says Jesus Christ's ideals of service and brotherhood are the guiding light for several people. And England's Joe Root announces to step down from Test captaincy after 5 years in charge. Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke with General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, Nguyen Phu Trong, over phone on Friday. The two leaders complimented each other on the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between India and Vietnam being celebrated this year. They expressed satisfaction over the rapid pace of wide-ranging cooperation under the India-Vietnam Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, which was established during the Prime Minister's visit to Vietnam in 2016. Both the leaders agreed to enhance defense partnership between the two countries. During the conversation, they also exchanged views on regional and global issues of shared interest, including the ongoing crisis in Ukraine and the situation in South China Sea. Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated Vietnam's importance as an important pillar of India's Act East policy and Indo-Pacific vision. He sought to enhance the scope of the bilateral relationship besides working for expeditious progress on existing initiatives. The Prime Minister also requested for greater facilitation of market access for India's pharma and agri-products in Vietnam.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar held a wide-ranging discussion with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York on Thursday. In a tweet, the minister said that he exchanged views on the global impact of the Ukraine conflict, especially on the food and energy security. Dr. Jaishankar said implications of the conflict are serious for developing countries. The External Affairs Minister also spoke with the Secretary General about latest developments in respect of Afghanistan and Myanmar. He appreciated Mr. Guterres' interest in working with India to effectively address important contemporary challenges. Dr. Jaishankar is on a 6-day visit to the United States from 10th of this month.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will inaugurate the 3-day Global Ayush Investment and Innovation Summit in Gandhinagar, Gujarat on 20th of this month. The summit will witness participation of industry leaders, academicians and scholars to deliberate upon ways to promote traditional medicines and systems. One of the aims of the summit is to attract lucrative investments to build India as the global Ayush destination in the world. In recent years, India has seen enormous investments due to the absence of foreign direct investments restrictions. The Ayush Ministry wants to go ahead with this momentum and utilize the platform to initiate target-oriented initiatives to enable the recognition and growth of traditional systems of medicine. The groundbreaking ceremony for the WHO Center for Traditional Medicine will also take place on 19th of this month in Jamnagar, Gujarat. This center will emerge as an international hub of global wellness, taking traditional medicine systems of the world to new heights. Expressing his views on the event announcements, Ayush Minister Sarbanand Sonowal said that the present market size of the Ayush sector has grown by 17% per annum from 2014 to 2020, and the government hopes to build the success of the sector through these flagship events and initiatives.
Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has announced that India will export wheat to Egypt this year. Egypt is one of the world's biggest importers of wheat. Agricultural and Processed Food Products Exports Development Authority APEDA Chairman M. Angamuttu said they are aiming to export 3 million tons of wheat to Egypt this year. Egypt imported 6.1 million tons of wheat in 2021, and India was not part of the list of accredited countries which could export wheat to Egypt. More than 80% of Egypt's wheat imports, estimated at close to $2 billion last year, were from Russia and Ukraine.
India's COVID vaccination coverage has crossed 186 crore 36 lakh today. Union Health and Family Welfare Ministry said more than 5,79,000 vaccine doses were administered during the day. The ministry said more than 2 crore 39 lakh vaccine doses have been administered to 12 to 14 years age group so far. In the last 24 hours, 949 new cases were reported in the country. The recovery rate is currently at 98.76%.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a news commentary, strengthening India-US partnership amidst crisis.
The virtual summit between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and American President Joe Biden ended on a very optimistic note and set the tone of the in-person meeting between Indian Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh with their American counterparts, Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in Washington, D.C. this week. The aftermath of the meeting has stunned China and Pakistan, caused certain disquiet in other countries, and kept many other nations engaged in deciphering the reasons behind the grand success of Indian diplomacy amidst the serious European crisis ravaging Ukraine. There is no doubt that Islamabad and Beijing would have expected the Biden administration to come heavily on India at the highest level to toe the American position on the issue of Russian invasion of Ukraine. There were already widespread perceptions that the United States was very much perturbed over the Indian approach to the Ukrainian crisis that included abstaining from multiple resolutions in the United Nations, refraining from condemning the Russian military action against Ukraine, and buying Russian oil in the face of US-led sanctions against Russia over the Ukrainian war. Many American and European officials had already visited New Delhi in the recent past to question Indian policy and seek answers from their strategic partner. There was also anticipation in certain quarters that the Ukrainian war would change the course of the decades-long constructive trajectory of the US-India strategic partnership. According to media reports, President Biden had described the Indian policy as shaky, and his Deputy National Security Advisor Dalip Singh had cautioned India against doing enhanced business deals with Russia in the backdrop of the Western sanctions against Russia. In this backdrop, Prime Minister Modi's conversation with President Biden was wide-ranging and encompassed global issues such as climate change, regional issues such as peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, and even bilateral issues to further strengthen multifarious ongoing collaborations between the two countries. More significantly, to set at rest speculations over divergences of Indian and American policies on Ukraine, Prime Minister Modi conveyed to President Biden India's struggle in ensuring return of more than 20,000 Indians stranded in the war zone. He also conveyed India's strong condemnation of the brutal killings of civilians in Busha and supported the demand for an independent investigation into it. Mr. Modi also mentioned about India's humanitarian assistance already sent to Ukraine and those also in the pipeline. President Biden deeply appreciated India's humanitarian and medical assistance. In the 2+2 dialogue that followed the virtual summit, the central focus of the foreign and defense ministries of the two countries was to exchange notes on developments in the Indo-Pacific region, planned for ensuring peace and stability in the face of challenges to the current balance of power in this region. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin specifically mentioned Chinese activities posing challenges to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Indian Defense Minister and External Affairs Minister also conveyed India's willingness to safeguard peace and prosperity in an open, free and inclusive Indo-Pacific. The two sides agreed that the war in Ukraine has brought about certain destabilizing consequences and that there is a need to work together to address the issues and concerns affecting the global economy, such as the need for maintaining resilient supply chains and addressing high energy and commodity prices and other difficulties brought out by the continuing COVID-19 pandemic. As expected, some queries were raised on the issue of India buying Russian crude oil and its implications on the overall Ukraine issue vis-a-vis the US-India strategic partnership. The Biden administration appropriately clarified that India determines her own energy policy and there was no pressure from Washington. The virtual summit and the in-person 2+2 ministerial dialogue underline the significance of Indo-US strategic partnership that is based on more than $160 billion of trade, more than 200,000 Indian students studying in the US, and rising energy trade between India and the US. New Delhi, in fact, buys more energy from the US than Russia. Even Europe buys several times more energy from Russia than India, even in the face of sanctions against Russia. India and the US continue to be partners for peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. The crisis in Europe would not derail the robust cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, was the clear outcome of the high-level Indo-US dialogue. With the high-level deliberations being a success, critics, adversaries and pessimists appear to have been silenced for now.
This is All India Radio, giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Russian Defense Ministry today said the warship Moskva that was damaged by an explosion on Wednesday has sunk. The ministry said Moskva, the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, was being towed to port when stormy seas caused it to sink. The 510 crew missile cruiser was a symbol of Russia's military power, leading its naval assault on Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine has claimed that its missiles hit the warship, while Russia refuted the claim and said the blaze caused the explosion of the warship's ammunition and the entire crew were later evacuated to nearby Russian vessels in the Black Sea. The loss of the warship, named for the Russian capital, is a devastating symbolic defeat for Moscow as its troops regroup for a renewed offensive in eastern Ukraine after retreating from much of the north, including the capital, Kyiv. The Moskva had the capacity to carry 16 long-range cruise missiles, and its removal reduces Russia's firepower in the Black Sea. The ship sinking was described by the US as a big blow, but American officials were unable to confirm whether Ukrainian Neptune missiles were responsible.
Russia today said it will respond to any Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory by striking Kyiv with more missiles. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said the number and scale of attacks will go up if its own settlements become targets. The warning came as Russia announced a missile strike on a military factory near Kyiv, which it claimed was in response to a Ukrainian helicopter attack on a Russian village. Meanwhile, Kyiv has denied the attack and accused Russia of staging the incident to stir up anti-Ukrainian hysteria.
A visiting group of U.S. congressional lawmakers have expressed their support for Taiwan and stressed the global importance of its security. The 6-member bipartisan group met the Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen in Taipei on Friday. President Tsai welcomed them and said Taiwan has always been a staunch and unwavering partner to the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham pled support for Taiwan, saying that to abandon Taiwan would be to abandon democracy and freedom. Democratic Senator Robert Menendez noted that Taiwan produces 90% of the world's high-end semiconductor chips and said it would be understood that Taiwan's security has a global impact. China's Defense Ministry spokesperson condemned the U.S. lawmakers' visit, saying that it defied the country's strong opposition and had led to further escalation of tension in the Taiwan Strait. Meanwhile, the Chinese military's Eastern Theater Command said that it conducted military patrols and drills by sending frigates and bombers and fighter planes to the East China Sea and the area around Taiwan.
The death toll from a tropical storm in the Philippines has risen to over 130. Emergency crews are still trying to locate dozens of missing people. Tropical storm Maggie brought torrential downpours to the country's central regions earlier this week, triggering landslides and severe flooding. Rescue operations have been hampered by rain and unstable soil. The authorities said more than 3 lakh residents had been forced to evacuate as of on Friday. The disaster comes as the country is still recovering from a typhoon that tore through its central islands in December, killing more than 400 people.
Japan's greenhouse gas emissions fell to a record low in the financial year that ended March 2021. According to media reports, the 5.1% decline marks 7 consecutive years of falls. Government figures showed on Friday as a result of slower industry activities amid the pandemic and wider use of renewable energy, emissions for 2020-21 fell to the equivalent of 1.15 billion tons of carbon dioxide from 1.21 billion tons the previous year. The 2020-21 level was the lowest since 1990-91 when Japan began compiling data on greenhouse gas emissions. Revised data from the Environment Ministry shows. Japan, the world's fifth biggest carbon emitter, raised its climate goal in April 2021, pledging to trim emissions by 46% from 2013 levels by 2030 instead of its previous target of 26%. If this is achieved, 2030 emissions will be 0.76 billion tons. The 2021 figure represents a reduction of 18.4% from 2013 levels.
A scenic mountain route running through the northern Alps in central Japan has reopened for tourists following a winter break. The Tateyama Kurobe Alpine route fully opened on Friday for the first time in about 4.5 months. Piles of snow were removed from the route. The route, which stretches for more than 37 kilometers, links Tateyama town in Toyama Prefecture and Omachi town in Nagano Prefecture. It contains roads, a ropeway system and cable car systems. Although the weather was not ideal, visitors enjoyed touching the snow wall and taking pictures there. North Korea celebrates the 110th birth anniversary of Kim Il-sung with dance, songs and fireworks this evening. Pyongyang regards the birthday of the country's founder and the grandfather of the country's current leader Kim Jong-un as its most important national holiday. It has said that this year 110th birth anniversary will be celebrated on a grand scale. State-run Korean Central Television reported celebrations at a square in central Pyongyang, including a dancing event, a music concert and fireworks.
Two of the world's largest credit rating agencies have warned that Sri Lanka is about to default on its debts. Fitch Ratings lowered its assessment of the island nation, saying a sovereign default process has begun. The agency's latest rating put Sri Lanka at near default and indicated that its payment capacity is irrevocably impaired. On the other hand, S&P Global Ratings made a similar announcement and said that a default is now a virtual certainty. The ratings agency said it was waiting for more details on Sri Lanka's debt restructuring plan or confirmation that its government had failed to pay its creditors. Earlier this week, Sri Lanka said it will temporarily default on its foreign debts as it faces its worst economic crisis in more than 70 years.
After a gap of 2 years due to COVID-19 pandemic, the Bangla New Year Pohela Boishakh was celebrated across Bangladesh yesterday with enthusiasm and festivity. The festivity started early in the morning at the Ramna Batamul in the capital Dhaka with the rendering of classical Ramkili Rag followed by festive songs and other programs. Other cultural organizations including the Cultural Affairs Ministry of the Government of Bangladesh, NGOs, social and cultural groups organized various programs across many venues in the capital city. Other cities and towns of Bangladesh also celebrated the event with great enthusiasm. Earlier, President M. Abdul Hamid and Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina greeted people on the occasion of Pohela Boishakh.
Christians across the world are observing Good Friday today to commemorate the day of crucifixion of Jesus Christ. On this day, Jesus sacrificed his life out of love for everyone and while suffering for the sins of humanity. It is observed as a day of sorrow, penance and fasting. On the occasion of Good Friday, people wish one another strength and happiness. Special prayers were held in churches across Kerala to mark the day. Prime Minister Narendra Modi remembered the courage and sacrifice of Jesus Christ on Good Friday. In a tweet, Mr. Modi said his ideals of service and brotherhood are the guiding light for several people.
England's Joe Root on Friday announced his decision to step down from Test captaincy after 5 years in charge. Root had come under pressure after England slumped to a 4-0 defeat in the last Ashes series and lost 1-0 in West Indies. Root was appointed as England's permanent Test captain after Alastair Cook stepped down in 2017 and went on to become its most successful skipper with 27 victories. The 31-year-old led the side to crucial series triumphs, including a 4-1 home series win over India in 2018 and a 3-1 win in South Africa in 2020.
In Ipl Cricket, chasing a victory target of 176 runs set by Kolkata Knight Riders, Sunrisers Hyderabad were 119 for 2 in 14 overs at Brabant Stadium, Mumbai when the reports last came in. Earlier put into bat, Kolkata made 175 runs for the loss of 8 wickets in the stipulated 20 overs. Tomorrow, Mumbai Indians will take on Lucknow Super Giants in Mumbai's Brabant Stadium at 3:30 p.m, while Delhi Capitals will face Royal Challengers Bangalore at Wankhede Stadium at 7:30 p.m.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Global Times writes that India-China bilateral trade increased by 15.3% to over $31 billion in the first quarter of this year, according to trade data released by the Chinese Customs on Wednesday, despite strained relations due to the prolonged military standoff in eastern Ladakh.
HT writes, quoting EAM Dr. S. Jayashankar, that America does acknowledge the difference between India and China over their respective stance on the Kremlin. On India, the White House has said that New Delhi is not violating any sanctions by purchasing oil from Russia, which is 1 to 2% of the country's total imports. Beijing had last month faced pressure from the West on taking punitive measures against Moscow amid the war.
Reuters reports China's economic growth is likely to slow to 5.0% in 2022 amid renewed COVID-19 outbreaks and a weakening global recovery, a Reuters poll showed, raising pressure on the central bank to ease policy further.
Al Jazeera writes, quoting experts, the uncertain economic outlook casts doubt on the ruling Chinese Communist Party's ability to reach its target of 5.5% economic growth in 2022.
NYT writes, China's economy pays a price as lockdowns restrict nearly a third of its population.
The Guardian writes, China's trade with Russia jumped by more than 12% in March from a year earlier, outpacing the increase in Beijing's trade with the rest of the world, according to Chinese customs data.
CNBC writes, China's lockdowns could trigger a logistics snarl that may dwarf 2020 and 2021. Many goods are stuck in China right now as a result of the COVID lockdowns, and it could become a big problem for the global economy, experts said. China is 20% of global demand, but its role in supply chains is much bigger than that.
Bloomberg writes, China's central bank likely to cut interest rate for a second time, according to experts. Most economists predict a reduction in MLF rate on Friday. State Council says RRR will be lowered at appropriate time.
The diplomat writes, China's embrace of the Taliban complicates US-Afghanistan strategy. China's willingness to partner with the Taliban undermines American efforts to influence the extremist group's behavior through pressure campaigns and sanctions.
Reuters writes, China's Commerce Ministry hopes the United States will remove tariffs on Chinese goods and stop cracking down on Chinese firms as soon as possible, Ministry spokesperson Xu Zhuting told regular news conference on Thursday.
The Pakistan Today reports that despite multiple meetings between the leadership of Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, PMLN, Pakistan People's Party PPP and other coalition partners, the new coalition setup has yet to reach understanding over the formation of federal cabinet.
The News International reports that Pakistan People's Party chairman Bilateral Bhutto Zardari has termed the press conference of ISPR DG Major General Babar Iftikhar as a breath of fresh air for democracy.
The Dawn writes that the road to democracy in Pakistan is littered with alliances, coalitions, long marches and movements, not to mention dharnas and strikes. It is rare that Pakistan's political parties have worked together to create common ground.
The Dawn report says the Islamabad High Court, IHC, on Thursday ordered the Election Commission of Pakistan, ECP, to decide the foreign funding case within the next 30 days.
According to the Pakistan Today report, the Director General Inter-Services Public Relations ISPR Major General Babar Iftikhar has categorically said that the word conspiracy was not mentioned in the communique issued following the meeting of the National Security Committee NSC last month.
The Frontier Post writes that the Director General of Inter-Services Public Relations DG ISPR Major General Babar Iftikhar Thursday categorically stated that the Pakistan Army had no role in politics as the country's future rested in democracy.
The Kathmandu Post reports says that the Pakistan Army is in the eye of the storm for the first time as supporters of ousted Premier Imran Khan chant the slogan of Chaukidar Chor Hai, implying that the electoral mandate of the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf PTI has been stolen.
The Daily Times reports that the government of Shehbaz Sharif has ordered to renew passports of the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and former Finance Minister Ishaq Dar. In February of last year, Nawaz's passport ran out and the government led by Imran Khan didn't renew it. In the next 48 hours, the passports of Nawaz Sharif and Ishaq Dar are going to be renewed, sources say.
The Pakistan Today reports that despite multiple meetings between the leadership of Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, PMLN, Pakistan's People's Party PPP and other coalition partners, the new coalition setup has yet to reach understanding over the formation of federal cabinet.
The News International reports that Pakistan People's Party chairman Bilateral Bhutto Zardari has termed the press conference of ISPR DG Major General Babar Iftikhar as a breath of fresh air for democracy. It is the responsibility not only of every institution but every Pakistani to support democracy, constitution and rule of law, he said while commenting on the press conference of the ISPR DG on Thursday through his Twitter handle on Thursday.
The Nepali Times writes that in the upcoming local elections slated for 13th May, the main contest will be between the Nepali Congress and the opposition UML. The Rising Nepal writes that the CPN Unified Socialist Chairperson Madhav Kumar Nepal has said the new year 2079 would be a crucial year in the political history of the country. In his message on the occasion of New Year 2079 BS Today, he said the year 2079 would be important for the country as it is a year of elections at the federal, province and local levels.
The Rising Nepal report says the CPN Maoist Centre chairman and former Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda has spoken of the need for unity among the Maoists and those communist parties wanting change in the country. He urged political forces aspiring to contribute as a socialist revolution to get united.
The Republica, quoting Nepali Congress NC General Secretary Gagan Kumar Thapa, writes that there will be no electoral alliance in the local level election if the local committees of the parties of the ruling coalition fail to agree on consensus candidates.
The Himalayan Times writes, quoting a top government official, that Nepal will fall short of its growth target. This underscores the troubled state of an economy grappling with the pandemic-induced loss of tourism, a widening trade deficit and soaring commodity prices.
The Rising Nepal reports that Nepal's foreign exchange reserves have dropped more than 16% to $9.59 billion in the 7 months to the middle of February because of the surging cost of imports fuel in particular.
The Rising Nepal writes, quoting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that Nepal is putting its efforts to further the process of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC. As the current chair of the Regional Association, Nepal wants to continue the SAARC process, the Foreign Affairs Ministry said. Nepal has been the chair of the SAARC since November 2014.
The Poland Sun writes that the World Bank president said China needs to improve its lending practices in the developing world, especially in terms of transparency in the loans it provides.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister talks to top Vietnamese leader Nguyen Phu Trong, holds discussion on situation in Ukraine and South China Sea. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar discusses the global impact of Ukraine conflict, especially on food and energy security, with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. India to inaugurate 3-day Global Ayush Investment and Innovation Summit. India to export wheat to Egypt this year. Death toll in Philippines from tropical storm Maggie climbs to 130. Christians across the world observing Good Friday today. Prime Minister says Jesus Christ's ideals of service and brotherhood are the guiding light for several people. And England's Joe Root announces to step down from Test captaincy after 5 years in charge. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Tanzania.
Vaishnav Jan ko dine ka hi Veed parayi jaane Vaishnav jaane to dene kaaye Veed parayi.
And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.